Ever notice how some stories just seem to echo, like down through history?
Mm.
Well, today's deep dive, we're diving into one of those,
Okay.
the Great Flood narrative
Right.
from, the book of Genesis,
Yeah.
chapter 6 through 9.
Familiar story.
Oh, yeah. And we're going way beyond just like a simple retelling.
Okay.
You got sources for that. We
Yeah.
want to uncover the why.
Okay.
Why the flood? What made this story matter back then? And how does it still resonate today?
It's fascinating, this flood narrative because it's not unique to the Bible.
Right.
I mean, you see similar stories in ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian cultures.
Hmm.
They all grapple with these ideas. Divine judgment, human fallibility,
Yeah.
the possibility of a fresh start.
Right, like it's humanity's oldest, uh-oh, we messed up again story.
That's a good way to put it.
But what we're going to unpack is how the Genesis version with Noah and that ark kind of adds these layers of meaning that go beyond just surviving a natural disaster.
Yeah, and you have to remember Genesis, that's the foundation of the entire Bible, right?
Right.
So to understand this story, that's key to unlocking deeper meanings throughout Scripture.
It's like the seed that contains the blueprint for a whole tree.
I like that, yeah.
We're going to tease apart those essential elements.
Okay.
So what are some of those seed elements, those themes that echo throughout the Bible?
Well, look at the overarching narrative,
Yeah.
right? Creation, judgment, destruction, recreation.
Okay.
And this pattern, it doesn't end with Genesis. I mean, you see it with the Israelites' exile and return, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, even foreshadowed in the book of Revelation.
Wow.
So Genesis is laying the groundwork for this cycle of sin and redemption.
That plays out across millennia.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're talking big picture stuff here, but let's zoom in on our main character,
Okay.
Noah.
Yeah.
He's described as righteous, blameless, walking with God. Now, those are loaded terms.
Right.
What did they actually mean back then? I mean, were Noah and his family literally perfect?
Yeah, it's easy to misinterpret those descriptions through a modern lens.
Yeah.
The ancient Hebrews, they wouldn't have understood righteous or blameless as sinless perfection.
Okay.
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
The Hebrew word for righteous is tzaddik. It
Wow.
implies a life aligned with God's justice, striving to live out the covenant.
Hold on. Covenant. Let's unpack that a bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
We can't talk about righteousness in the Bible without understanding covenant.
Right.
The Hebrew word being berit.
Okay.
It's not just a contract.
Very
It's
cute.
about relationship, loyalty, mutual obligation.
Okay.
God established a covenant with creation itself and then reaffirmed it with Adam.
Okay.
Noah, by being described as righteous, he's essentially upholding his end of that, pre-existing agreement.
He's a model for what it means to live in right relationship with God.
Exactly.
So it's less about checking off a list of rules
Yeah.
and more about embodying a certain way of life, a commitment to something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
But that raises a question.
Yeah.
If Noah was so righteous,
Yeah.
why didn't God spare everyone else? Why the flood at all?
Right.
What does that say about individual versus collective responsibility?
That's where it gets complex.
Okay.
The text, particularly in verses like Ezekiel 14.1720 and 18.1920, emphasize on individual accountability before God.
Okay.
You are responsible for your own choices, your own actions.
Oh, yeah.
However, that doesn't negate the impact our actions have on others.
Right.
Noah's righteousness, it couldn't erase the consequences of widespread wickedness. But it served as a beacon, a testament to the possibility of living differently.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this story goes way beyond like a simple morality tale, right?
Yes.
It's about the complexities of human nature,
Yeah.
our relationship with the divine,
Yeah.
and just those big questions of justice and mercy.
Big questions.
But let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Talk about the ark itself.
Okay.
I mean, this wasn't just some hastily built raft.
Right.
Genesis goes into like a surprising amount of detail about its construction.
Yeah.
300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high.
It's specific.
Could you give us a sense of scale here? What does that look like in modern terms?
Imagine a vessel longer than a football field,
Wow.
built with ancient tools and technologies.
Right.
Even if you use the shorter Israelite cubit,
Okay.
we're talking about an ark that's roughly 437 feet long.
That's massive.
It's huge.
And the text doesn't just say build a big boat. It's incredibly specific
It is.
about the dimensions, the materials.
Yeah.
It's almost like God was an architect drafting the blueprints for like the ultimate lifeboat.
It's a fascinating observation,
Yeah.
and it connects to a larger pattern we see throughout Genesis and beyond.
Okay.
Think about the detailed descriptions of the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And later, the instructions for building the tabernacle.
Yeah.
They're not just random details.
Right.
They suggest a link between these spaces, a connection between the physical and the spiritual.
Speaking of the tabernacle,
Yeah.
isn't it interesting that the Hebrew word used for both the ark and the basket that kept baby Moses safe from the Nile is the same? Teva. Seems more than a little coincidental, don't you think?
I don't believe in coincidences when it comes to the Bible.
Okay.
That deliberate word choice points to a deeper layer of meaning.
Okay.
It hints at this idea of typology,
Right.
where physical objects or events prefigure spiritual truths.
Oh.
Just as the ark carried Noah and his family to safety, the basket becomes a symbol of deliverance, prefiguring the salvation offered through water baptism.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Those aha moments.
Right.
So we've got this divinely ordained vessel,
Yeah.
this blueprint for a sacred space.
Right.
But practically speaking, how do you even begin to build something like that?
Right.
I mean, Genesis mentions resinous wood and pitch,
Yeah.
which makes me think of some kind of like ancient, super durable sealant.
You're on the right track.
Okay.
It's possible they were describing a sewn boat,
A sewn boat.
a shipbuilding technique that used twisted reeds or fibers to bind the planks together and then sealed with pitch or resin for waterproofing.
Okay.
And these boats were surprisingly sophisticated,
Really?
used across the Indian Ocean and Mesopotamia for centuries.
So not only is this ark huge and symbolically resonant, it's also a testament to the ingenuity of ancient boat builders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got our righteous ark builder,
Right.
this meticulously crafted vessel,
Yeah.
and then cue the downpour.
Yeah.
Speaking of the downpour,
Right.
the way Genesis describes the flood, it's interesting, isn't it? It's
Right.
not just like a wall of water appearing out of nowhere.
Right.
There's a structure to it.
Yeah.
These distinct phases that lead up to the world being completely submerged.
Yeah, you're picking up on something crucial there.
Okay.
The text lays out 7 distinct phases,
Okay.
from the initial warning all the way to the waters receding. And that repetition of the number 7,
Right.
that's not accidental. Remember how we were talking about symbolism?
Yeah.
Numbers in the Bible often function like musical motifs,
Okay.
recurring with layers of meaning.
So 7, what's the significance there? I mean, we know it's a big deal in Jewish tradition.
It is. Yeah.
But how does that connect to the flood specifically?
Think back to the very beginning of Genesis. 7 days of creation.
Right.
7 representing completeness, wholeness, divine perfection.
Okay.
So when you see it repeated in the context of the flood, it suggests this parallel.
Okay.
Just as God brought order out of chaos in creation,
Right.
the flood, structured in these 7 phases, represents a return to that primordial state.
Wow.
It's like wiping the slate clean.
A cosmic reset.
Exactly.
And it's not just 7s, right?
Right.
There are also those 40-day and 40-night periods that are mentioned
Right.
throughout the flood narrative.
Yeah.
What's the deal with 40? It seems to pop up a lot in the Bible.
Yeah, you're right to pick up on that.
Okay.
40 is another one of those loaded numbers. Often represents a time of testing, of transition, a period of intense spiritual formation. Think of Moses on Mount Sinai for 40 days.
Right.
The Israelites wandering in the desert for 40 years.
Right.
Even Jesus is 40 days in the wilderness.
So in the context of the flood, those 40-day and 40-night periods,
Yeah.
they're not just about like waiting out the rain.
No.
It's about a deeper kind of transformation, a spiritual cleansing
Yeah.
that mirrors the physical one.
Precisely. It's that idea of being stripped bare,
Right.
confronting your own mortality, emerging changed on the other side.
Yeah, and it's not just about Noah and his family,
Right.
right? The whole earth undergoes this 40-day period of purification.
Right. Yeah.
A symbolic death and rebirth.
Exactly.
That's heavy stuff.
It is.
But then amidst all this upheaval, this imagery of destruction and rebirth, we get this like almost tender moment
Right.
with the dove and the olive leaf.
Yeah.
It's such a hopeful image.
It is, yeah.
What's the deeper meaning there?
Yeah, it's a powerful juxtaposition, isn't it?
Yeah.
The dove, even in ancient Near Eastern cultures, was often seen as a symbol of peace, new beginnings, even divine presence. In the biblical tradition, it becomes even more significant, foreshadowing the Holy Spirit that descends upon Jesus at his baptism.
Wow.
And the olive leaf,
Right.
I mean, that speaks for itself, right?
Yeah.
A sign of life returning, of peace after the storm.
It's interesting because even with those signs of hope, with that promise of a new beginning, human nature doesn't magically change after the flood.
Right.
We see hints of that in the very next chapter of Genesis.
Do.
So what's the takeaway here?
Hmm.
If the flood doesn't erase our capacity for, messing up, then what was it all for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think the answer lies in understanding the nature of God's covenant with Noah.
Okay.
This isn't about wiping the slate clean and expecting humanity to suddenly achieve perfection.
Right.
It's about God's unwavering faithfulness to his creation. Even when we stumble, the flood itself may have been a consequence of human sin,
Right.
but the covenant that follows is an act of grace, a promise that God won't give up on us.
Even when we give up on ourselves.
Exactly.
So it's less about if you mess up, there will be another flood.
Right.
And more about understanding that God's love, God's commitment to us,
Right.
transcends even our most epic failures.
Exactly. Yeah. That's hopeful.
It's an incredibly hopeful message,
Yeah.
but it's also a call to action.
Okay.
The covenant isn't just about sitting back and, basking in God's grace.
Right.
It's about recognizing our responsibility to live into that grace, to strive towards righteousness, even as we acknowledge our own imperfections.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I've always found it interesting that this covenant isn't just between God and humanity, right?
Right.
It includes all living creatures.
It does, yeah.
Why is that significant?
That's one of the most beautiful aspects of the Genesis flood narrative.
Okay.
It highlights a truth that's often overlooked.
God's compassion extends to all of creation. And this idea, this isn't just tucked away in Genesis.
Right.
It's a recurring theme throughout the Bible.
Okay.
Think about the Psalms, which speak of God caring for the sparrows and the lilies of the field.
Right.
The flood narrative, with its inclusion of the animals, reminds us that we're part of something much larger than ourselves.
Right.
We're called to be stewards of the earth, caretakers of all that God has made.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
Especially in today's world, where the consequences of our actions on the environment are becoming increasingly clear.
Right, yeah.
But speaking of actions and consequences,
Yeah.
after the flood, there's this interesting detail. God gives Noah permission to eat meat. Before it was fruits and veggies.
Right.
So why the change? And what's the deal with that whole no eating blood caveat?
Right.
That one always seemed a bit random to me.
Yeah.
It's not random at all. Like when you think about the deeper meaning of
Right.
blood in the ancient world.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, for the ancient Hebrews, blood represented life itself, right? It was considered sacred, connected to the very presence of God.
Okay.
So when God prohibits Noah and his descendants from consuming blood, it's not really about dietary restrictions.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the sanctity of life, right?
Right.
It's a reminder that even as humans, we're granted dominion over the animal kingdom.
Right.
There's this responsibility to treat all creatures with respect.
That makes sense. It's like there's this ethical dimension
Yeah.
to the post-flood world
Right.
that goes hand in hand with this covenant.
Exactly.
And hey, speaking of powerful symbols,
Yeah.
we can't forget the rainbow.
Right.
I mean, it's not just a pretty meteorological phenomenon, is it?
Definitely not. That rainbow, that's like the ultimate covenant sign. And it's even more powerful when you realize
Okay.
that the Hebrew word for bow, queshet,
Okay.
it's the same one that's used for weapons. It's like God is literally hanging up his bow in the sky, promising to never again wage war on the earth with a flood.
Wow, there's something so striking about that image.
It is.
And just the fact that it's this universal symbol of hope,
Yeah.
something we still connect to today.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It speaks to the enduring power of this story.
Yeah.
Even thousands of years later, that image of the rainbow after the storm, it still resonates. It's a reminder that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always hope for renewal, for a fresh start.
And, if we're sticking with that idea of symbolism,
Yeah.
even the rainbow with its spectrum of colors
Right.
speaks to that idea of covenant and completion.
It does.
It's like this giant multicolored promise, arching across the sky.
I like that. Yeah.
It really is, though.
It is.
And it reminds us that even though the floodwaters have receded,
Right.
the story isn't over.
It's not over.
There's this ongoing dialogue between humanity and the divine,
Yeah.
this call to live into the covenant,
Right.
to strive towards righteousness, even as we acknowledge our own fallibility.
Our own imperfections.
Yeah, I love how this one story, this ancient narrative,
Right.
contains so many layers of meaning. It's about judgment and mercy, destruction and renewal,
Right.
the fragility of life and the enduring power of hope.
And that's the beauty of diving deep into these texts. They offer us glimpses into these timeless truths,
Yeah.
these profound questions about humanity's relationship with God, with creation, with each other.
Right.
Questions that continue to resonate, to challenge us, to push us deeper in our understanding.
It's like the floodwaters receded, but they left behind these like fertile layers of meaning that we're still unpacking today.
That's a good way to put it.
So to everyone listening, consider this like your invitation
Yeah.
to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep making those connections.
Because as we've seen, the more we delve into these ancient stories, the more we discover about ourselves and the world around us.
And who knows?
Yeah.
You might be surprised by what you find.
You might.
That's the magic of a good deep dive. Until next time.